When my daughter-in-law told me to leave my own home, I did something even I did not expect. I smiled. Not because I felt strong, and not because anything inside me felt calm, but because in that moment, smiling was the only thing holding my tears back. I remember standing at the doorway, my hand resting on the wall, the cold paint steadying me while the house around us felt too silent to breathe. She looked at me with firm eyes, not angry, just final, as if her decision had been waiting inside her for a long time. "Auntie, I think it's better if you go stay somewhere else for a while. Maybe at your sister's place. We need some space." The words were simple, but they hit like a quiet storm. I did not look at my son standing behind her. I did not want to see whether he agreed or whether he was simply too afraid to disagree. So I lowered my eyes and looked at my hands instead. They were shaking, but my voice wasn't when I said, "It's all right." I walked to my room slowly, hearing soft whispers behind me, maybe guilt, maybe hesitation, but I did not turn back. I packed a few clothes, opened my drawer, and picked up the framed photo of my son as a little boy, the one he never noticed missing. I did not cry then. I didn't cry when I closed my suitcase or when I zipped it shut. I only smiled, because sometimes a smile is the last fragile shield between a mother and her breaking heart. That was the day everything changed. But this story doesn't begin with pain. It begins with love, with effort, with years of a quiet life shared between a mother and her child. My name is Amina. I have always been a simple woman, someone who speaks softly, walks slowly, and believes in gentle kindness. For most of my life, it was only me and my son, Hamid. My husband died when Hamid was still very young, too young to understand the silence that falls on a home after a loss. I was 26, standing alone in a world suddenly larger and heavier than I knew how to handle. But I learned. I worked, I cooked, I saved whatever little I could. I learned to fix leaking taps, broken chairs, burnt bulbs, and an aching heart. Hamid grew up watching all of it, but he also grew up watching me smile through it, and he carried that softness inside him. He was the kind of boy who apologized before anyone asked, who sat with lonely classmates, who hugged me even when he was too old to show affection. We lived in a small house, cracked walls and a roof that leaked every monsoon, but it was ours. The kitchen held the memory of us kneading dough together. The living room held the memory of him studying late at night. The backyard held jasmine plants because he knew they were my favorite. When he started his first job, he came home with his first salary, placed the envelope in front of me, and said, "Amy, you struggled enough. Now let me take care of you." I still remember the warmth of his hands, the pride in his voice, and the way hope filled my chest. Everything remained peaceful until the day he told me about Zara. He spoke about her with the softness of someone speaking about a blessing. He said she was kind, respectful, thoughtful, and that she had already asked about me. I listened quietly, feeling the happiness in his voice, and also the small fear every mother feels when she realizes her son's heart is no longer hers alone. When I met Zara, she was polite and gentle. She touched my feet, helped me in the kitchen, complimented the home I had kept together with my own hands. I welcomed her with genuine warmth and prayed for their happiness. When they got married, I placed my hand on her head and said, "This house is yours now. I raised my son with love. Please raise your marriage with the same love." And she hugged me and whispered that she would never let me feel alone. In those early months, she lived exactly as she promised. She woke up early, cooked with me, brought small gifts, and made my son take me to the park on weekends. The three of us would sit together in the evenings, me in my old rocking chair, Hamid on the carpet, and Zara on the sofa, talking about life, work, dreams, and the future. I thought God had given me not just a daughter-in-law, but a daughter. But slowly, the changes began. Not loudly, not suddenly, just quietly, the way sunsets happen without anyone noticing the exact moment the light fades. Some days, she woke up late. Some days, she stayed in her room for hours. Sometimes she spoke with a light impatience, or scrolled through her phone at the dining table instead of joining the conversation. I ignored these things. She was young. She had work. She had her own routines. But there were little moments, soft but sharp, when I felt like a stranger. When I walked into a room and the conversation suddenly stopped. When she suggested changing things in the house that held old memories. When she called Hamid by affectionate names in front of me, names that reminded me that his world no longer revolved around me. None of this was wrong. It was just unsettling. One evening, I sat in the living room shelling peas while Hamid and Zara laughed softly in their room. Their happiness made me smile at first, but slowly, a quiet sadness filled me. I realized no one needed me, not for guidance, not for comfort, not even for company. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had raised him, fed him, protected him, and I wondered where they belonged now. I began spending more time in my room. Cleaning the same shelf twice. Folding and refolding clothes. Pretending to be busy so I wouldn't feel like a burden. The silence between me and Zara grew slowly. She wasn't rude. She wasn't harsh. She was just distant. She would sigh softly when Hamid asked for my opinion. She would say, "Don't worry, I'll handle it," without meeting my eyes. Every small gesture made me step back a little more. Hamid noticed, but he didn't understand. He asked why I had become quiet, why I spent so much time alone, why I refused to join them for dinners or TV. I always said, "I'm fine." Because I didn't want to disturb their peace. I didn't want to be the reason anything felt heavy in the house. But even silence grows. Even distance has weight. And soon, that silent distance became the space where misunderstandings began to grow. The tension grew slowly, almost like fog creeping across a quiet street, barely noticed until everything was blurred. It began with small things, small misunderstandings that I tried to ignore. I remember one morning when I was in the kitchen, preparing tea. Zara walked in, smiling, and said, "Amy, I've already made breakfast. You don't need to worry." I nodded, pretending it didn't hurt, but inside, a small pinch pressed my chest. It wasn't about breakfast. It was the feeling that my role, the one I had cherished for decades, was quietly being replaced. I tried to stay involved without being intrusive. I helped her fold laundry, I cleaned a corner she had missed, I added spices to dishes she cooked, thinking we could share the home together. But every effort was met with a polite, distant "it's okay" or "don't worry, I'll handle it." At first, I thought I was overthinking. Maybe she was just independent, I told myself. But independence doesn't feel like a shadow slowly taking your place. Hamid seemed caught between us. He loved me, of course, but he also loved Zara, and sometimes it felt like he didn't even notice the subtle changes in my presence. One evening, I tried to speak to him about it. "Hamid, I feel a little left out sometimes," I said quietly. He smiled awkwardly and replied, "Amy, she doesn't mean anything by it. She's just trying to help." I nodded and said nothing more. I didn't want to make him feel guilty. I didn't want him to see my sadness. But every time I left the room, a small ache followed me, lingering like a shadow that refused to fade. The small tensions began to turn into tiny arguments. One afternoon, we were planning a family dinner with relatives. I suggested a few simple dishes, ones I had prepared for years, and Zara looked at me, not unkindly, but with a quiet dismissal. "Amy, maybe we can try something different this time." "It's just a suggestion," she said. I smiled and agreed, but later, in my room, I felt a sting that I could not explain. It wasn't about the food. It was the feeling that I no longer had a voice in the home I built. I began to notice the small ways she was changing Hamid. He would listen to her first, nodding at her suggestions before considering mine. He would ask her opinion on things he used to discuss with me, from small chores to important decisions. And while I told myself it was normal for a young couple to have their own life, my heart couldn't stop aching when I realized that the closeness we once shared was slipping away. One evening, I overheard a conversation through the thin walls of their room. They were speaking softly, almost whispering. I could not hear every word, but the tone was different. It wasn't harsh or angry, but it was deliberate, intentional. There was a plan, a careful shaping of thoughts and feelings, and I felt a cold weight in my chest that I had never known before. My own son, the boy who once apologized before anyone else, was beginning to see the world through someone else's lens, a lens I could not influence. It wasn't long before small frustrations turned into misunderstandings that hurt more deeply. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find her tidying up, and she said, "Amy, I think you should stay in your room today. I'll handle everything." Her tone was soft, almost caring, but the words struck me like a quiet blow. I tried to smile, to hide the hurt, but inside, I felt a rising fear that this house was no longer mine, that I was slowly being erased from the life I had poured everything into. Hamid noticed my silence and asked me, "Amy, are you upset?" I shook my head. "No, I'm fine." But I was not fine. I was exhausted from holding back my feelings, exhausted from pretending that every small dismissal or distant glance did not matter. I could feel the distance growing between us. It was subtle, like a thread slowly loosening, but it was undeniable. I knew it. He knew it. But none of us spoke the words that might have stopped it. The first real breaking point came on a rainy afternoon. I had cooked a special meal, something Hamid loved since he was a child. I had prepared it with care, wanting to remind us all of the warmth that had once filled the house. I walked into the dining room, hoping for a smile, a kind word, a hint that my effort mattered. But Zara looked at the food, then at Hamid, and said softly, "Maybe we can order something else today? This is a lot of work." Hamid didn't protest. He nodded. And in that moment, I felt my heart crack. Not in anger, not in rage, but in a quiet, deep sorrow. I stepped back, nodded, and said, "Of course. Whatever you both prefer." But later, in my room, I could not stop the tears. I cried for hours, quietly, so that no one would hear. I cried for the home I had built, for the son who was slowly slipping away, and for the love that now seemed to belong to someone else. From that day, I tried to retreat even more. I spent time alone, keeping busy with small tasks, folding clothes, cleaning shelves, and reading old letters. I tried to convince myself that this was for the best, that a mother must sometimes step back to let her children live their own lives. But no amount of convincing could stop the quiet ache that followed me everywhere, even into my sleep. Weeks passed, and the subtle changes grew sharper. Zara began inviting friends over, rearranging the house, making decisions without consulting me or even mentioning them. Hamid followed her quietly, never standing up for me, never offering me the warmth he once carried. It was as if our home had shifted under my feet, and I was left trying to find a place that no longer existed. And then came the day she said it. Standing in the living room, calm, composed, as if she were speaking of an ordinary fact, she said, "Amy, I think it's better if you stay somewhere else for a while. We need space." Space. Those were the words that cut through everything. Space from the home I built, space from the son I raised, space from the life I thought would never change. I smiled, packed a few clothes, and left quietly, because I knew that if I protested, I would only break myself completely. I stayed with relatives for a few days, trying to gather my thoughts, trying to understand what had happened. I replayed every memory, every conversation, every small dismissal. I thought of all the moments I had tried to step back, to be kind, to avoid conflict. I wondered how love could be repaid with distance, how years of care could be returned with polite exclusion. But in that quiet time alone, I also began to see the patterns. I began to understand that sometimes, even when we act with love, life can change in ways we cannot control. I realized that my son was not against me by choice. He was influenced by someone he trusted, someone he loved, someone he believed had his best interests at heart. And while that realization did not take away the hurt, it allowed me to breathe. It allowed me to step back and see the situation with clarity, to separate my love from my pain, and to find the quiet strength that mothers always carry deep inside. I decided not to confront them immediately. I decided to watch, to wait, to let the emotions settle. I spent time writing letters I did not intend to send, letters that allowed me to release the pain without creating new conflict. I walked in the rain, feeling the cool drops on my face, and I understood something simple: life continues, even when hearts ache. Love remains, even when it is misunderstood. And a mother's heart can carry even the deepest sorrow without breaking completely. From that distance, I began to see small cracks in Zara's calm demeanor, small hesitations in Hamid's actions. I saw that their love, though strong, was not perfect. I saw opportunities to reconnect, to be part of their lives again, but in a new way. And slowly, carefully, I began to plan my return, not with anger, not with accusation, but with quiet presence and patience, hoping that the love we had shared could once again find a place in their hearts. When I returned home, it was quiet, too quiet, and the air felt heavy with things unspoken. I did not rush in. I did not demand explanations. I walked slowly through the rooms I had once filled with love, now filled with the faint echoes of absence. I placed my keys on the table, hung my coat carefully, and sat down in my favorite chair, the one by the window. I breathed in the familiar smells of the home, and I realized something: nothing had really changed, except the way we had been seeing each other. Hamid came to me first, his eyes downcast, unsure how to bridge the distance that had grown between us. He did not speak immediately. He simply sat beside me, and I felt the warmth of his hand brushing against mine. It was a hesitant touch, a small reassurance, and it reminded me of all the times he had been a child leaning on my shoulder for comfort. "Amy," he whispered, I missed you." I nodded, tears welling up quietly, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the tension begin to ease. Zara came in later, her movements careful, her voice soft. She had learned, slowly, that the space she had created did not bring peace. It only created silence and sorrow. She knelt before me one afternoon and said, "Amy, I was wrong to ask you to go. I thought I was helping, but I see now that I hurt you." I looked at her, feeling the mix of hurt and hope in my heart, and I simply nodded. Forgiveness does not always need words, sometimes it only needs a heart willing to open. From that day on, things began to shift. We did not talk about the past immediately. There was no need to. Actions became the bridge. I returned to small chores in the kitchen, and she allowed me to cook without insisting otherwise. Hamid began seeking my advice again, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The house, once filled with distance, began to feel like home again, not exactly the same as before, but perhaps something even stronger, a home where love had been tested and survived. There were quiet moments that meant more than words ever could. Sitting together at the dinner table, all three of us laughing softly over something trivial. Helping each other fold laundry or water the plants. Sharing stories from our day and realizing that even though life had changed, it could still hold warmth. Every small gesture became a thread weaving us back together, slowly, carefully, gently. I also realized that change is not always betrayal. Sometimes it is simply life moving forward, and it is love that allows us to adapt. My son was still my son. He was still the boy who held my hand in difficult times. And Zara, though she had caused pain, was still capable of care and kindness. I chose to focus on these truths, to embrace the moments of connection rather than dwell on the moments of separation. One evening, after dinner, I sat by the window, looking at the garden I had planted. I also began to see the small ways in which we all had grown. Hamid learned to balance loyalty with independence, and Zara learned that care does not mean control. I learned to step back without stepping away, to speak when necessary and to listen when needed. And in these small lessons, the house transformed from a place of quiet tension to a place of shared life once more. Sometimes, late at night, I still look at my hands, remembering the years I had poured into this home and this son. And sometimes, quietly, I smile. Not because there was no hurt, but because the hurt did not destroy us. It shaped us, taught us patience, and reminded us of the delicate power of love. I have learned that life will always bring challenges, that the people we love will sometimes hurt us unintentionally, and that the greatest strength comes from forgiveness and understanding. I have learned that a mother's heart is not fragile, it bends, it endures, it waits quietly, and it loves endlessly. And now, when I sit in my chair by the window, watching the sunlight fall on the garden, listening to the soft laughter of my son and daughter-in-law, I feel a calm I have not known for a long time. A calm that tells me that love, even when tested, can return. A calm that reminds me that home is not just walls and furniture, it is the hearts of those we cherish, and the bonds we choose to nurture every day. This story, my story, is not just about pain or betrayal. It is about patience, understanding, and the quiet strength we discover in ourselves when life changes in ways we never expected. It is about the resilience of love, the courage to forgive, and the peace that comes when we open our hearts again. And in that peace, I have found a lesson I will carry with me always, even when the people we love take us for granted, even when distance grows between hearts, love has a way of returning, soft, gentle, and stronger than before.